On that cheerful note, again, my name is Frimet. I am an associate at Burkhart, Wexler, and Hirschberg, and a growing and important area of my practice has become providing due diligence counsel to broker-dealers. I'm going to start another way, but actually I wanted to address the question that you posed about the FAQ. We don't have an FAQ available, but in terms of a most commonly asked question, and I think this is important information for everyone in the room to have, a question I've received is the client saying, if I'm prepping the private placement, I don't need audited financials. There is an exemption, so I do not need to maintain audited financials. And that is not true. Somewhere along the line, there is a safe harbor provision for a financially strapped company in terms of producing audited financials, but it is not so broad-based to say, I just need Skippy down the street to say my financials are good and I'll set to go. It doesn't work that way. Under the safe harbor provision, you are allowed to submit financial statements in support of your private placement documents where the income statement and the statement of cash flows are unaudited. However, the balance sheet has to be audited within 120 days of the offering. It's Rule 502 under Reg D, little piece of information you might want to take home. In terms of due diligence, there's an interesting dichotomy between the due diligence required for the issuer and the due diligence required for a broker-dealer. That's why I think it's kind of important to discuss this issue here, because we have so many issuers and so many broker-dealers with them. And it's important for the issuer to be mindful of those requirements that the broker-dealer is required to comply with, because it's the broker-dealer that's providing the selling ammunition for that private placement. In the broker-dealer landscape, the due diligence requirements are completely governed by suitability requirement under FINRA rules. Technically right now it's still NASD Rule 2310 that is changing. Actually next year that will change. It will be in suitability will be 2111 under FINRA rules. But currently the suitability analysis is a two-part test. The first is the security or transaction, the recommendation in question, a suitable transaction, meaning does it have merits to what the actual security or what the investment is. That requires the broker-dealer to take an in-depth analysis into the actual business underlying the investment. So it's not just a checklist. It's not a paper trail to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, so to speak. It's an actual analysis as to, are these financial projections reasonable? Are the financial statements accurate? It requires a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb approach to the underlying investment. The other aspect of it, the second prong of the test, is to determine whether the investment is suitable for that particular investor. And that comes down to things like the subscription agreement having the adequate accredited investor standards checked off. I think we all know that the primary residence no longer counts towards the $1 million net worth figure in determining whether an investor is accredited. And it's only after the broker-dealer complies with both of those two prongs of the suitability requirement that they can reasonably recommend an investment in the private placement. In order to accomplish that, FINRA rules actually require interpreting SEC rules that the broker-dealer engage in certain steps that are considered minimum steps to achieve due diligence. Things like interviewing management, contacting vendors, checking on customer orders, verifying statements made. And like Ken was saying, and I think it's critically important, Googling management. It's the easiest thing in the world to do, and it'll unearth so many potential issues that might come up down the road that would taint a deal and prevent it from ever going through. The other beauty part of doing something simple like a Google search is that it might uncover issues that are remedial. So the things that can be addressed in the early stages of the offering so as to not negatively affect and require offering investors a right of rescission later on the private. So those are all affirmative steps that the broker-dealer can do and has to do to ensure that they're building the due diligence file correctly. The ultimate reason why there's a due diligence file and why every broker dealer should have one, it's a defense measure. If you're going to, I don't know if you've heard, there's a slight chance that a couple of these private placements that go out might not actually succeed. It's happened before, I swear. When that happens, things like the legal standard of why an investor can sue a broker or an issuer kind of go out the window in favor of a very adamant and zealous claimant's attorney saying, let's bring the action now and we'll figure out if anything was done wrong later. These are things that we have to address. The broker-dealer protects himself by building his due diligence file correctly. We can later rely on it in both fair arbitration. It has to go into a class action shareholder dispute against the issuer in court, and a regulatory proceeding. That's it for me. If you have any questions about third-party or broker-dealer due diligence, I'd be happy to answer them. If you have any other questions about securities practice in general, I hope I can operate as a resource to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. I appreciate it. Okay, now that everyone is sufficiently nervous, I think it's appropriate to lighten up a bit. And you all know that we are in an environment that is kind of hostile to the industry today. And I'd like to share with you a little anecdote that I heard from a client of mine. Apparently, one day, a customer called the branch office of a brokerage firm, introduced herself. She spoke with the receptionist. She said, you know, my name is Mrs. Smith, excuse me, and I'd like to speak with my broker, Mr. Schwartz. The receptionist said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Mr. Schwartz died. Can anyone else help you? Or would you like to speak to the branch manager? No, and she hung up. About 15 minutes later, she called back and said, Mr. Smith, I'd really like to speak to my broker, Mr. Schwartz. Sorry to tell you, Mr. Schwartz died. Can anyone else help you? Now, she does this 4 or 5 times during the course of the next hour. And finally, the receptionist alerts the branch office manager and says, I don't know what to do with this woman. She keeps calling. She asked for Schwartz. I told her Schwartz is dead. And she keeps calling back. Branch office manager says, don't worry about it. I'll handle it. When she calls again, if she calls again, give me the call. Sure enough, she calls again. This time the branch office manager picks up. She asks for her broker, Mr. Schwartz. Branch office manager says, Mrs. Smith, you've been calling all morning, haven't you? Yes. And you keep asking for Mr. Schwartz? Yes. And we keep telling you that Mr. Schwartz died? And you know he died? Yes. So let me ask you, why do you keep calling? Well, she responded by saying, well, to tell you the truth, I just love to hear it. It's so funny. We are not as popular as we once were. Especially with the market going down.
Steve, I'm officially stealing that job.
You have my permission.